I don't know about you, but my power bills have been increasing. And for better or worse, I even live in an old house that has neither heating nor air conditioning, so my bills aren't even as bad as they might otherwise be. Indeed, it would be significantly worse for people who need or want heating in winter, and even worse still for businesses that need electricity to operate. We're talking cafes that need refrigeration or refineries that need electricity in order to do their core business. Unsurprisingly, people are a little bit jaded and a little bit annoyed by the high energy prices. And unsurprisingly, it begs the question of why is it the prices are so high and what we could do to improve the situation, or conversely, what we could do to worsen the situation, and how government policy really should be adapting. And thus, attention is focused on energy policy, and specifically Australia's drive for net zero, and even more pointedly, Chris Bowen, and the dumpster fire that has been his management of his portfolio. Now, of course, you can let me know your thoughts about net zero and energy policy and renewables in the comments below. And of course, if you want to show your disdain for net zero, or indeed your potential support for net zero, we can pick up some merch in the link in the description below. There are various things ranging from mugs and t-shirts that have known wind turbines blazoned upon it. Conversely, if you happen to love renewables, there are designs to show that too. You can show whatever you happen to feel like. Any case, you can check that out using the link in the description below, and you'd support the channel while doing so. Nevertheless, let's get back to net zero. Well, what's happening here? Australia is trying to reduce its carbon emissions to net zero by 2050. Now, of course, the idea of net zero does require a little bit of definition. After all, if you go out and pollute a lot, but you offset it with carbon credits, well, there's a big debate about whether that actually does anything. But the bigger issue is whether Australia, which only makes up about 1% of global emissions, and I'll get to that in a second, should be doing necessarily as much as it is. Furthermore, Australia has backed on various other punitive measures, such as the ute tax, which are going to dramatically tighten emission standards on vehicles, and therefore dramatically increase prices on cars that are deemed to be polluting, with the prices ratcheting up over time. It's going to make vehicles significantly more expensive. But of course, none of this is ever good enough for the activists, with Anthony Albanese and Chris Bowen reportedly pushing to have even more stringent targets by 2035, and being reticent to enable and approve any fossil fuel production or usage, and even reluctant to approve things such as natural gas, even though it is clearly required for baseload capacity given the volatility and uncertainty associated with renewables. After all, if you look at solar power, it's not going to function all of the time, and solar power with batteries can help get around that, but batteries aren't exactly the cheapest or easiest things in the world, given how much energy we need. Furthermore, wind turbines aren't going to function all of the time, and wind turbines do in fact break down due to things such as weather events and the like. So therefore we need a degree of baseline support, even if renewables do make up the lion's share of the energy base. We need look no further than Spain and the blackouts to see exactly this situation. Now, this whole debacle was neatly summed up by Jerry Noonan in what I think is going to become a classic interview.
We have coal because we've got the biggest coal deposits in the world, but we're not allowed to burn the stuff, so the world's really. It's all right to be idealistic, but you also have to be realistic. And until the lights go out, the idiots that want to be green on everything and not do mining, not do coal, not do anything, they're going to have to go back and use candles and live in tents, and then they'll no, you might laugh, but it's true. You understand what I'm talking about? I'm not talking bullshit, I'm talking reality. No. If we don't get realistic, it's as simple as that. We're not allowed to use uranium. We've got the biggest uranium deposits in the world in Australia. We're not allowed to mine the so it's all so when half the die, well, the world will be a better place, and then those of us that survive will get it going again. My next door neighbour, I was talking to him, he's a lawyer, so he's not an idiot. Well, he is a but that's another problem. But he said, oh, that's right, you just put plugs along the highways. I said, but if you haven't got a source from a power station, plugs on the highways aren't going to do jack shit, right? Do you understand me? The people don't understand. They think the electricity comes out of space. But if you haven't got a charging system, which is a steam coal burning power station, how the can you charge your batteries? Do you understand that?
Yeah, I understand.
Well, there's a lot of don't. And that's the problem with the world.
Now, of course, I think Jerry Noonan is speaking some sense here. After all, it's going to be important to have reliable, cheap energy for Australia's industrial base, such as it is, to keep functioning. And if Jim Chalmers really does want to increase productivity, as he says that he does, well, we need cheap energy to do that. And if energy gets more expensive, well, clearly, industry is going to get less productive and Australia's economic base is going to shrink. And for the economic base shrinking, the tax base is going to shrink. And if the tax base shrinks, then tax rates need to increase on everyone else, creating a death spiral as increasing rates cause more people who are productive to go overseas, particularly those people with mobile capital. And here we're talking investors, because investors have very mobile capital, and this means your tax base shrinks even more, in a downward spiral. Something that politicians don't actually seem to realize. They don't seem to realize incentive effects can create a massive problem. But that's a slightly separate issue. Back onto net zero, we can see the measures that Australia is already taking are seemingly not good enough for the zealots. For example, we have the UN climate chief, Simon Steele, catastrophizing and stating that fruit and veg will become a once-a-year treat. I can't believe he's actually being serious. It's so hyperbolic that it verges on parody. It's zealotry. And since the zealots also object to livestock because it emits methane, what exactly do they expect us to eat? If fruit and veg becomes once a year, and livestock is now verboten, do they expect us to eat insects? What exactly is their plan? It's hard to believe that anyone actually takes the UN climate chief seriously when he utters such hyperbole. Now, of course, I've rather lost trust in a lot of the UN. It appears to be co-opted by busybodies and control freaks who simply enjoy telling other people what to do. And worse than that, they target countries that are seen as easy. So we're talking countries like Australia, while giving a free pass to countries that have massive problems. For example, Iran, which UN doesn't seem to actually care very much about, but they're going to go down the throat of Australia over what are seemingly minor infractions. It beggars belief that people actually take it seriously because of how hypocritically the policies are applied. Now, of course, Barnaby Joyce is having none of this. He's been pushing back against net zero recently, in addition to people like Pauline Hanson. Barnaby Joyce recently in an interview noted that major countries such as India and China and the US are moving away from net zero, and Australia accounts for only a fraction of global emissions.
And I think what we are doing through this whole process, and it is gaining momentum, is giving the truth to people that net zero is a scam for the benefit of those billionaires and multinational companies which are making billions of dollars out of the Australian taxpayer in the first instance and out of the Australian power user and the pensioner in the second instance for absolutely no effect on the climate whatsoever.
Your leader, or the coalition leader, I should say, and the energy spokesperson, Dan Tehan, says they're going through a process. They've got to honour that process with the Energy Committee and come up with their policy. Are you patient to see what that... I mean, obviously, you're calling for net zero to be scrapped, but are you going to listen to what that committee comes up with?
Look, I believe that everybody has their right to follow whatever process they like, but the process that I believe is that this is not a binary outcome. It's not a case where you get to the end and say, well, we've had an inquiry, we're keeping net zero. We've had an inquiry, we're amending net zero. We're having an inquiry, we're having another inquiry. I want to get rid of net zero. My inquiry is the power bill. My inquiry is the pensioner being put out of their house. My inquiry is farms that have been overrun with transmission lines and wind towers and solar panels. They don't want me to go to inquiry. They want me to do all my endeavours to stop it now. And I tell you what, Kieran, is this the truth or not? They're not renewables. Okay? Let's not call them renewables. They're intermittent. There's nothing renewable about them. They end up as landfill. They end up as landfill. And if you actually went through all the carbon that is required to make them and the steel and the coal, and when they're gone, you have to get more coal and steel to make them again, there's nothing renewable about that. It is a scam because they want you to say pretty words. Renewables, farms, net zero. I mean, the only thing that's going to be net zero, you're going to have net zero economy. But let's just clearly understand that the majority of the world's not participating in this. China, Russia, India, Indonesia, United States of America, they're not in, okay? So what on earth are we doing?
Now, Barnaby Joyce makes, I think, an excellent point here. So let's assume for the sake of argument that the world must reduce emissions. And more generally, I think it is important to reduce pollution. So even if we debate about whether emissions need to go down and what exactly needs to happen there, we certainly need to reduce pollution, because pollution is bad for health. And I generally do agree that emissions probably do actually need to decrease. However, I'm significantly more of a realist than people such as Chris Bowen. For example, as Barnaby Joyce points out, Australia is unlikely to be able to genuinely influence anything. Unless Australia genuinely believes that the only way it can influence policy is by leading by example and leading with significant cuts to emissions and significant damage to our economy, Australia, well, it's not clear what it's doing. Australia, a country of 20 million, with not very much manufacturing, is but a tiny fraction of the world's emissions. According to Wikipedia, for example, we make up only 1% of the world's emissions, and this has increased by only 6% since 2000. China, by contrast, makes up 34% of the world's emissions, and the United States 12% and India 7.6%. China and India have significantly increased their emissions since 2000. Now clearly, China and India have developed significantly since then. But the bigger point, and the bigger thing I want to emphasize, is going forward, China and India are continuing to increase their emissions, whereas Australia and many other countries, so we're talking the US historically but not so much going forward, are not really increasing their emissions. In essence, Australia is but a drop in the ocean here, suggesting that Australia's impact here is relatively minor, unless we actually believe that we are going to be able to lead by example. But then that would rely on China and India, and really any other country, actually caring about what Australia does. Are they actually looking to Australia for an example here? Or would they be looking to the US, for example? And here the US has been backing away from net zero. Now granted, this might change after President Trump's presidency ends, but President Trump was certainly not fond of net zero or renewables. And he recently remarked as such when he was talking about the various trade deals he's going out and making while in the United Kingdom.
Wind is a disaster. When we go to Aberdeen, you'll see some of the ugliest windmills you've ever seen. They're the height of a 50-story building. And you can take 1,000 times more energy out of a hole in the ground this big. This big. It's called oil and gas. And you have it there, the North Sea. Wind needs massive subsidy. And you are paying in Scotland and in UK and all over the place where they have them, massive subsidies to have these ugly monsters all over the place. So I've restricted windmills in the United States.
Indeed, even if we think that Australia needs to lead by example, why do we need to be so aggressive with our approach to net zero? We can still lead by example by reducing emissions, but doing so in a significantly less aggressive and less costly manner. There's no reason for us to lead by example by being so cost insensitive. However, people like Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese seemingly don't actually care. Likely because they're not actually the ones spending the money. Rather, they're making policy decisions with someone else's cash, with someone else's checkbook. They're writing checks that they don't have to pay personally. And that's one of the fundamental problems with politicians. And all of this is why we have so much concern over net zero, and why the Nationals are going away from it. Now, the Liberals don't seem to want to have the debate over this, being concerned about being called climate change denialists. But there's a difference between denying climate change at all and noting that if we're going to do with emissions, we need to do so in an economically viable manner. There's no point sending the country bankrupt when no other country is doing so, and we're only 1% of global emissions, and that percentage share is decreasing. If the Liberals had a spine, they could deflect from any of the criticism by emphasising a more measured approach that considers Australia's economic reality. But by trying to please everyone, the Liberals come across as insipid. It appears they're trying to chase votes in some of the teal electorates that are theoretically winnable, but not really on net zero. Just look at Goldstein, for example. Tim Wilson won in Goldstein, but he wasn't campaigning on net zero. He was campaigning on a platform of aspiration and ambition, a platform of people giving more of their own hard-earned cash. Tim Wilson leans more libertarian than the rest of the Liberal Party. and he won one of the teal electorates. And the other teal electorates, so we're talking Kooyong or Wentworth or Bradfield, which is now a teal electorate, well, they lost. And I'd posit that one of the reasons they lost is because they didn't run on that platform of aspiration and ambition. Rather, they tried to chase the teals by being, well, like the teals. And that ultimately came back to haunt them. The Liberals need to have a spine. This doesn't necessarily mean they need to completely abandon the idea of net zero or walk away from tackling climate change. It means they need to have some economic reality factored into their policies, and need to level with Australians about the cost of all of these various policies and create a clear point of difference from Labor. But you can let me know your thoughts about net zero and the approach of our politicians in the comments below. And of course, you want to show your support for or disdain for net zero and renewables, or check out the merch linked in the description below, and would also help out this channel. But nevertheless, hopefully I'll see you for future videos as well.